I always knew the day would come, but I didn't think it would start on a Monday morning so ordinary it felt almost insulting. The moment I opened the door to the scheduling control room of North Star Aviation that morning, I heard the one sound that made my spine go cold: silence. Not the peaceful kind that comes with early mornings, but the kind that meant the system was hiding something, an invisible flaw humming beneath the surface, waiting to explode at the worst possible time. For the past 8 years, this room has been my entire world. It's where I oversee everything tied to flight schedules, duty time, rest periods, certifications, and all the strange exceptions every department in aviation tries to slip into the system like some private joke. People think this job is just plugging numbers into a program: hours, routes, duty logs. Done. Let them think that. But let one pilot exceed federal limits once, and federal inspectors will arrive faster than the police responding to a 911 call. One small mistake can cost North Star millions or shut us down entirely. And me. Every day I keep this aging but stubbornly reliable beast from detonating in my face. My name is Elena Carter. I am 38 years old, and for 8 years, I've been the only person at North Star who can keep this monster of a scheduling engine running smoothly. 178 routes, 12 states, nearly 6,000 pilots, flight attendants, and technicians. One missed rest window and the entire chain cracks. One expired certification, and a jet sits idle for the day. One small error on an international pairing, and the federal agency can suspend us for 2 weeks. I know all of this, not from books, but because I've stopped those disasters more times than anyone realizes. There was a blizzard that tore through the East Coast. I rebuilt our entire flight plan overnight with only a few hours left before regulators forced mass cancellations. Then, the time our automated rest tracking glitched, and I had to correct hundreds of entries by hand to keep pilots from flying illegally. I earned my place here, and everyone knew it. Everyone except the people who had never stepped foot into the control room or understood what aviation truly runs on. Last month, North Star was officially bought out by Argonne Capital. No one here liked it. Investment firms never care about operations, only quarterly numbers. Cut here, shave there, delete something else, and suddenly they think the company is stronger. I've never seen a decision from them that helped workers or improved safety. Still, I hoped my department was too critical to touch. I tend to be wrong at the moments that matter most. That morning, I walked past the wall of displays showing every flight, every status, every alert. A few minor warnings. Nothing fatal. My system always throws a tantrum when someone installs a new feature. I had barely touched my keyboard when Human Resources called me to an emergency meeting with the new leadership. Nobody brings you into an emergency meeting to congratulate you. I stood up, tied my hair back, and headed toward the conference floor. In my head, I was already listing every possible worst-case scenario. I have done this job long enough to know that when a morning feels like an omen, it usually is. The meeting room was on the 13th floor, a place people like me rarely enter. I always joked that the folks up there didn't know the smell of jet fuel or the sound of landing gear locking into place. They knew spreadsheets and projections. Maybe that is unfair, but that is how it felt, and the feeling never helped. When I stepped inside, I saw unfamiliar faces, sharp suits, polished expressions, people who looked like they had walked in straight from a business magazine photo shoot. I knew in that moment everything was about to turn. I just didn't know how. What I did know was this: none of them understood my system. None of them understood my industry. And they definitely didn't understand what happens when they tamper with the wrong thing. That morning marked the end of my 8 relatively stable years at North Star Aviation, and the beginning of the greatest crisis of my career, one that would drag the entire airline into chaos. What I didn't know then was that this crisis would become the sharpest counterstrike of my life. If you're still listening, maybe you know the feeling. Anyone who's been in a job long enough has faced that one day when everything familiar suddenly turns its back on you. If you're listening from somewhere across America or anywhere else, leave a comment. I want to know I'm not the only one who has felt this. And if you like stories where calm turns into calculated retaliation, keep going. Because what happened after that morning at North Star Aviation has not even begun yet. The people sitting in that conference room that morning looked like they had just stepped out of an exhibit on next generation leadership. The kind of crowd that believes every problem in aviation can be solved with a PowerPoint deck and a few brightly colored charts. Mark Avery stood at the head of the table wearing a shiny watch that probably cost as much as a month of night shift crew wages. He smiled like the meeting was his chance to show off his perfect teeth, rather than discuss matters tied to aviation safety. I had never met Mark before, but it took me 10 seconds of watching him stand there, watching the way his eyes darted, the way he placed his tablet on the table, to know exactly the type of man I was about to deal with. The kind who thinks an MBA is a passport to understanding every industry, including ones he has never worked in for even a single day. The kind who believes real world complexity only exists because of outdated systems and old fashioned employees. I had met his type in a few places before, and I had yet to see one bring anything good. Elena, thank you for coming, Mark said, as if I had any real choice. Argonne Capital believes North Star is facing a golden opportunity to modernize. The aviation industry is changing, and we must change with it. I saw a few longtime staff exchange worried looks. In corporate language, change usually means cut and remove. I sat down, kept my voice steady, and waited. To execute our optimization strategy, we need to reduce dependence on outdated systems, Mark continued. Your scheduling system is more than 8 years old, and frankly, it no longer aligns with the company's new model. I knew that line was coming. I just did not expect it to be delivered with such clumsiness. My system was not perfect, but it had kept North Star alive through blizzards, strikes, and hundreds of unexpected disruptions. And it did something no spreadsheet ever could. It understood the absurd exceptions buried in federal law, the loopholes, the real world chaos only someone in the job can understand. Before I could respond, Mark turned to a young woman sitting on his right. This is Samantha Avery, our new systems analyst. She will present the modernization solution. Samantha stood with the confident smile I often see on people who have just graduated with honors. She was young, maybe 26, wearing an expensive suit and holding a thin laptop like a stage prop. I did not dislike her, at least not yet. But the moment she opened her mouth, I knew she had no idea what she was walking into. I built a comprehensive scheduling model using Excel combined with the new analytics tool, Samantha said. It is visual, fast, easy to use, and can automate every manual process currently running. Excel. I almost laughed. Not because Excel is inferior, it is a great tool, but using it to run the entire flight schedule of an airline across 12 states is like jumping into an ice lake wearing flip-flops. Still, I said nothing. I wanted to hear the rest of what she believed. My model handles flight hours, certifications, rest days, and federal constraints, all in one simple interface. No complex data structures or back-end validation required. A few younger managers nodded, enchanted by the phrase easy to use. The people who understood aviation stayed quiet. So did I. I kept looking for something grounded in reality. But the longer she spoke, the clearer it became. She understood theory, not the field. She could read federal regulations for a month and still never grasp what happens when a pilot flies from Texas to Colorado, then back to Arizona in the same week, with constraints from federal law, union rules, aircraft type, and route category. Samantha clicked through her laptop, opening a bright, color-coded spreadsheet that she clearly saw as her masterpiece. And I understood instantly that this was not just a presentation, it was a verdict. We believe the new solution will cut nearly 40% of scheduling costs, Mark added, eyes gleaming. And to achieve that, we must restructure your department. I looked straight at him. Restructure, a polished term for replacing experienced staff with cheaper options. I knew exactly where I stood in that picture, Mark continued, voice firm, as if he were announcing something obvious. Starting next month, the new system will be fully deployed. Samantha will take over scheduling operations. And Elena, we need you to assist with the transition. I did not answer right away. In my head, I was running through 8 years of work, 8 years of holding this system steady through every crisis, all to be replaced by a flashy spreadsheet. I stood, calm to the point of coldness. If this were the direction they chose, I could not stop it. But I knew one thing. Aviation does not care about spreadsheets. It cares about reality, and reality would answer for me. And that was the moment I walked out of the room, fully aware I had stepped into the next phase of a game they did not understand. But I understood it, and I also knew that the decision they made that morning would become their greatest mistake. I had barely stepped out of the conference room when Samantha appeared at the door of the scheduling office with the excitement of a first-day intern. She stood there holding her laptop against her chest, smiling so brightly I almost turned away just to avoid looking at that naive confidence. I knew her type all too well. Confident in theory, in case studies, in classroom simulations, but never once tested against a real system that had been running longer than their careers. Elena, can you start showing me the current workflow? I want to understand everything before we move to the new model. Her voice was polite, but the urgency underneath it was obvious. Not urgency to learn, but urgency to prove to Mark that she could handle everything quickly. I nodded, walked to the main screen, and brought up the system. The familiar streams of data moved across the display like the heartbeat of this airline. Every number, every record, every punctuation mark was something I had read so many times that it lived in my memory. This is the main dashboard. I pointed to the crew flight hour summary. North Star has used this software since before I joined. It is not pretty, it is not modern, but if you know how to drive it, it is exact. This is where we update mandatory rest time according to the federal agency, weekly flight limits, and aircraft-specific restrictions. Samantha nodded rapidly, as if she understood every single detail. I knew she did not. No one could tell by glancing at it for a few minutes. I began showing her the weekly schedule process. First, we check the special cases: pilots returning from international routes, crews requiring at least 32 hours of uninterrupted rest, technicians with certifications expiring within 10 days. I moved quickly, my hands following years of instinct. Samantha asked, "Why check these manually? My model can automate them." I looked at her. Because even the federal agency is inconsistent with its own data. She said nothing, but I could see her writing it down like she was marking a weakness. When we moved to the rest hour classifications for the state of Florida, a small red alert flashed in the corner. Samantha leaned in instantly. "What is this? An old bug?" I answered. "The system returns incorrect values for flights with technical stops in Tampa. The bug appeared 6 years ago after a failed update. I fix it manually by cross-checking with the input data. It has never produced an incorrect final result." Samantha gave me a look I did not appreciate. "You have been fixing it manually for years, and you never documented this in the process." I kept calm. "This is a vendor issue. I sent 3 repair requests, but they refused to fix it because the cost was too high. This is not an operational flaw, it is a software flaw." Samantha stared at the screen, then back at me. "Do you understand that this directly affects flight safety?" Her voice made me pause, not because she was right, but because she was completely misunderstanding the situation. The bug did not affect safety. It only caused the system to miscalculate rest hours if left untouched. And I never left it untouched, not once. But Samantha did not know that. In her mind, a flaw was a flaw, and anyone who allowed it to exist for 8 years was irresponsible. I could see that judgment forming behind her eyes. I explained, "This is harmless when handled correctly. I have never let a single error pass. I check and fix it every week." But Samantha closed her laptop. "I need to report this to Mark. This is serious." I exhaled. I knew things would get messy. I just did not expect her to twist it into something dangerous. She left the room so quickly that I did not even have time to say anything else. I stood there staring at the flashing red alert I had come to see as a harmless scar on the system, harmless to me. To someone who did not understand, it looked like blood. That afternoon, I received an urgent meeting notification. The 13th floor conference room made my stomach tighten again. When I walked in, Mark was already seated, wearing a deliberately serious expression. Samantha stood beside him, tense but trying to look confident. "Elena, Samantha just reported a major issue in our current system. Mark spoke like he was about to announce a shutdown. I stood straight. I already knew where this was going. Samantha delivered her statement with a dangerous certainty. Elena has known for years that the system miscalculates pilot rest hours. She has been fixing it manually, without documenting the procedure, and without reporting the issue to leadership. This creates enormous risk for the company. My new model can automate everything and eliminate these errors. I wanted to laugh, but I could not. I saw Mark nod, his eyes cold, as if he had been waiting for the perfect excuse. Elena, Mark continued, your system no longer meets our standards. When there are errors that are not reported properly, we cannot rely on the operation of this department. I tried to explain. This is a vendor flaw. I sent reports in the past. It does not create direct risk. I have always fixed it correctly. Mark cut me off. But you have no evidence that you reported it. And fixing something manually for years is a sign of poor management. By that moment, I understood this was no misunderstanding. This was a decision made long before today. The tiny flaw Samantha found was nothing more than the perfect pretext. Mark delivered the final line in a voice that left no room for escape. We are terminating your employment. You have 3 days to transition everything to Samantha. After that, North Star will deploy the new system. I stood still for a few seconds, not because I was surprised, because I felt the deep sting of being blamed for a flaw I did not create and had spent years protecting the company from. I did not argue. I did not plead. I simply looked at Mark and Samantha and said one thing. Do you really think you know what is waiting ahead? I hope so. I left the room with the same silence I had heard that morning. But this time, the silence was not a warning of a system issue. It was a warning of something else, something I understood better than anyone in that building. If they tried to run an airline with Excel and naivete, reality would crush them before I even had time to blink, and I would witness every second of it. The last 3 days of my time at North Star passed so quickly that I barely felt anything at all. No anger, no sadness, just one thing left: curiosity. I wanted to see how Samantha would handle this system once I was no longer behind her, fixing each tiny flaw she never even knew existed. The next morning, she showed up in the control room right on time, looking energized as if she were about to transform the aviation industry. She opened her laptop and a giant Excel sheet stretched across it like a science fair poster. I began walking her through each step of the workflow, the steps she thought were excessive, but I knew were the only thing keeping the system from collapsing. First came the rest calculations for pilots returning from international routes. The federal agency requires a continuous rest period of 32 hours, and the agency's data is often slow or inconsistent, forcing the system into manual corrections. Samantha took notes quickly, annoyed. My model does that automatically. I smiled. I had heard that line too many times in 3 days. Then I showed her how to check for expiring certifications. Technicians preparing to service one type of aircraft need a different endorsement than those working on another. The rules are not difficult, but the overlapping exceptions are endless. Samantha asked why the system could not calculate it automatically. She still did not understand that even the agency sometimes mislabels its own data, and the only reason major errors never happened was that a human with experience reviewed them. When we reached the Florida dataset, the familiar red alert appeared. Samantha jumped on it instantly. What is this error? I explained that it was a vendor flaw from 6 years ago. I reported it 3 times. No one fixed it. I corrected it manually every week, and it had never once caused an operational issue. She stayed silent for a long moment and wrote something down. She did not understand that the flaw was harmless when handled correctly. In her mind, a flaw was a flaw, and someone fixing it manually for years was simply poor management. I could see that misunderstanding forming clearly. Later that afternoon, she imported an actual pilot hour file to test in Excel. I stood beside her, watching. The data started loading, then slowed, then froze. She clicked refresh, then refresh again. Nothing. Excel was frozen. Probably the network, she said, her voice slightly shaking. It was not the network. But I let her learn it the hard way. On the second day, I handed over more complex segments. The list of pilots who required review after incidents, crews scheduled across 3 states in the same week, and all the cases that fell into newly defined exceptions. Samantha asked question after question, but each one carried the same classroom logic of someone new to the industry. She believed everything could be standardized with a single conditional rule. On the final day, she asked to run the entire operation through her Excel model. Mark appeared, standing behind her like someone waiting for a fireworks show. Samantha entered the data. Excel slowed again, this time even worse. Some cells flashed circular reference errors. Some turned into strange values. I knew she did not understand. Her model simply could not handle the layered logic of a real scheduling system. I boxed up my small belongings. As I walked past the control room, a few pilots waved goodbye. One of them spoke with a voice heavy with disappointment. "We are going to miss you, Elena." I nodded. These people understood my value far more than the new leadership ever would. I saw Samantha one last time at the door. Her face carried the exhaustion of 3 long days. "Thank you for the training," she said. "I think I have the basics now." I looked directly into her eyes and told her the only thing that might save her from catastrophe. When the system shows an error, do not run it again immediately. Each rerun duplicates the data or stacks it incorrectly. Find the error first, then run it. She nodded, but I knew she did not understand the weight of that warning. People without experience always assume errors are simple. Fix and rerun. They do not realize that one tiny flaw can trigger chains of failures, and in aviation, those failures do not simply cause inconvenience. They destroy an entire airline's schedule. I left the building on a windy afternoon. From the parking lot, I looked back at the 27th floor, where the control room lights were still glowing. Samantha sat at the screen, her laptop open, her colorful Excel grid shining like a child's game. But outside that window was a major airline operating across 12 states, with thousands of people depending on every rest hour, every certificate, every number. They did not understand that this system cannot be tamed by theory or spreadsheets. It only answers to someone who has lived with it long enough to know every whine, every breath, every harmless flaw, and every flaw that brings the federal agents to your door that very same day. I knew that once I walked away, things would not be fine. Not because I was arrogant, because reality was simple. They were trying to replace the heart of an airline with Excel. I got into my car, closed the door, and pulled out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, the control room lights kept flickering. I did not need to look any further to know what was coming. Disaster was simply waiting for its scheduled time. I left North Star on a Friday afternoon. On Sunday night, I lay awake, not because I missed the job, but because I knew exactly what was waiting for them the next morning. Excel and naivete never win against the reality of aviation. But they would not believe that until the truth hit them in the face. On Monday morning, I woke up the same way I always did, but instead of driving to the office, I made coffee and opened my laptop. I knew the messages would come within hours, and they did. At 8:40, my phone began vibrating nonstop. The first message was from Travis, a pilot I had worked with for 8 years. "Elena, what happened to the new schedule? The app shows me flying 2 back-to-back routes, only 3 hours apart. That is not enough rest under federal rules." I told Samantha. She said it is just a display glitch. I closed my eyes. A display glitch is what new people call everything they do not understand. The second message came from a flight attendant. "The new schedule says I have to be in Denver at 6 in the morning, but I am still working a Phoenix flight tonight." "That is impossible, Elena." The third was from a technician. "The system assigned me to service an A320, even though my certification expired last week. This never happened when you were running the schedule." The messages kept coming like floodwater. I logged into the crew portal using an old credential that was still active. It took only seconds to understand what was happening. Samantha's schedule was a disaster that no words could describe. It looked like someone had taken a map, ripped it into pieces, and glued it back together with cheap tape. Some pilots were assigned 3 consecutive legs in one day. Some international crews had their mandatory rest hours cut. Some attendants were assigned flights they did not have the language certification. Maintenance crews were placed on aircraft they had never touched. Excel does not understand federal law. It does not understand layered constraints across states. It does not understand anything except numbers. And Samantha did not understand that either. At 9:30, the federal agency issued a red alert to North Star for suspected illegal scheduling. A red alert is no joke. It is the final step before a direct investigation. An hour later, the first internal bulletin appeared. Phoenix canceled 8 flights. Chicago canceled 4. Denver canceled 5. New York delayed its entire morning schedule. I sat upright. North Star had never canceled flights in clusters like that during my entire 8 years there, not once. At 10:15, Travis called again. Samantha keeps insisting the flaw comes from your old system. She says Excel is correct and the old data is corrupted. I almost laughed. The data was not broken. The people were. Near midday, the media released videos of passengers yelling at airport counters. A Denver reporter filmed more than 100 people stranded because the schedule was wrong beyond belief. The word meltdown started appearing in headlines. At 12:20, a coordinator messaged me. Samantha is crying. Excel calculated negative rest hours for a pilot. One pilot is listed as flying 36 hours straight. I knew exactly what that meant. Her model had hit a circular reference loop. Excel did not know how to resolve it, so it spat out nonsense. The issue was not the system. It was her flawed logic. Another message came immediately after. Samantha ran the model again. The data doubled. She panicked and ran it a third time. I had warned her clearly, but people never listen to what they think they already know better. By 1 in the afternoon, North Star had canceled all flights out of Phoenix for the next 4 hours, a move that only happens when the system is fully paralyzed. I had never seen anything like it in my life. At 2 o'clock, the state of Colorado detained a flight crew for suspected rest violations. The news spread within minutes. The entire country now knew North Star was collapsing. At 2:40, a pilot posted a photo of the new assignment board. He was scheduled to fly from Seattle to Houston to Miami on the same day. The post had more than 2,000 shares within 30 minutes. I felt something strange. Not joy, not satisfied, just a confirmation of what I had been saying all along. No one schedules an airline with Excel. At 3 in the afternoon, the pilot's group chat shared an audio recording of Mark shouting into his phone, blaming the old system and claiming I had hidden procedures. I exhaled. People like Mark always need someone to blame when things outrun them. At 3:20, a Seattle crew refused to take off because the new schedule showed them with negative rest. Negative rest means they somehow owed sleep, a concept that exists in no federal document. At 3:47, a video went viral across social media. More than 300 passengers in Denver are yelling at North Star staff. One man held up a sheet of paper and shouted, "My pilot is scheduled for 3 illegal legs in one day. What is this airline doing?" North Star had officially sunk. I watched the notifications pour down my screen. Flights are canceled everywhere. Crews are staging spontaneous walkouts. Passengers furious. Federal warnings are increasing. Mark is losing control. Samantha is falling apart. Everything was happening so fast that no one had time to even think. I set my phone down and leaned back, not relieved, not pleased. Just the feeling of watching a storm I had warned them about for weeks finally make landfall. And once a storm makes landfall, it follows its own path. It tears through anything built on arrogance and delusion. Nothing stops. This storm does not wait for anyone, and it was only just beginning. My phone kept buzzing late into the afternoon, as if the entire North Star operation were sliding across a sheet of ice with no one left who knew how to stop it. I did not answer most calls, not out of anger or spite, but because I wanted to see how they managed without the person who had been quietly fixing everything for years. Sometimes you have to let a structure fall before people notice the foundation they ignored. Close to 4 o'clock, I finally picked up a call from Hannah, who once oversaw crew training before Mark pushed her into meaningless administrative work. Her voice was tight, almost trembling. She said they were blaming me, claiming the old system was too complicated and that was why Excel had failed. Samantha was calling the mess a result of operational legacy. I smiled softly. I was not surprised. Mark had never known how to take responsibility. He always punched upward and never looked down to see what he was standing on. Hannah said the federal agency had given North Star 4 hours to submit a clean scheduling explanation. If not, the airline would be placed under temporary control, meaning every schedule had to be approved manually, with each route delayed by as much as a day and a half. In simple terms, the entire airline would be nearly paralyzed. I asked what Mark had said. Hannah quoted him word for word. Elena intentionally left a complicated legacy system to create dependence. I could not help it. I laughed. Hannah was quiet a moment, then whispered that everyone who had ever worked with me knew he was lying. But Mark was already in emergency meetings and trying to push the story in that direction. I exhaled, not angry, just struck by how the least informed voices are always the loudest when crises hit. The moment I hung up, a message from Linda, North Star's head of legal, popped up. Just one line. Elena, we need you. Linda never wrote like that unless things had reached the federal level. I had not even replied when the phone began ringing again. This time it was Mark. I let it ring 3 times before answering. He sounded like someone who had not slept for days. I could hear chaos behind him. Shouting, footsteps, printers running nonstop. He said the federal agency was threatening a temporary suspension. Samantha could not fix the system. She kept insisting that every flaw was from corrupted legacy data. I cut him off instantly. The data is not the issue, Mark. The issue is someone entering the wrong formulas. He went silent. For the first time since I had known him, silent in a way that meant he had nothing to defend himself with. Then he asked if I could come back, just temporarily, as a consultant, whatever it takes. I leaned back, watching the sky outside turn darker. I heard what he was really saying. He was terrified, the kind of fear people feel only after burning a bridge and watching their only path collapse. Mark did not apologize. People like him would rather drown than admit fault. I said slowly, I will not come back just to put out fires. If I return, I want authority. I want the power to stop fixing other people's mistakes again and again. He asked immediately, what do you want? His voice was caught between desperation and resentment. He hated needing me, but the crisis was so large that his pride had become worthless. I did not answer his question. Instead, I asked, where is Samantha? Mark hesitated, then said she was taking a break in the conference room. In other words, Samantha had broken. I felt a hint of sympathy for her, not because of her mistakes, but because she had been thrown into a game she believed she understood. Arrogance mixed with inexperience is always a dangerous combination. Mark said the federal agency wanted a clean schedule within 4 hours, or they would launch a full 30-day audit. 1 month. 1 month of paralysis for an airline is a catastrophe. Crew, technicians, ground teams, and thousands of people could go without pay. The consequences would fall on everyone except Mark and Samantha. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. I no longer had any responsibility to them, but I knew exactly what would happen if the agency stepped in. North Star could lose operating rights for key routes and disrupt thousands of lives. I asked Mark, what title do you want me to return under? He said, Senior Consultant, reporting directly to me. I let out a short, humorless laugh. I will not report to you. Mark choked for a moment, then asked, who would you report to? The chief executive, or the board, not you. I heard restrained anger in his breath, but this time he had no leverage. The crisis had taken all of it from him. He said he would escalate the request. His tone made it clear how much he despised the idea, but pride had no place in a disaster this size. When the call ended, I set the phone down. The room was washed in the gray-gold light of a fading afternoon. I felt no victory, no satisfaction, just the quiet recognition that what I had warned them about for weeks had unfolded exactly as it always does when people believe theory can replace experience. I opened my desk drawer. The old notebook was still there, its cover worn soft. Inside were 8 years of notes. Exceptions, hidden rules, fragile points that only someone in the field would ever notice. The same things Samantha had once called too manual. I flipped to the first page. A sentence I wrote 3 years earlier glowed faintly under the fading light. Not every system stands on theory. Some survive only because experience holds them together. Outside, the sunset burned red like heated metal. I exhaled slowly, not to release tension, but to prepare. I knew the next call would be different. And when it came, every role in this game would shift. Not because they wanted it, but because there was no choice left. The call I had been waiting for all afternoon came at 6:30, just as I set my notebook down. When I saw the name on the screen, I knew things had gone far beyond the warning stage. It was not Mark. It was not Linda. It was the chief executive of North Star, Thomas Grayson. Thomas did not call someone who had been fired unless the fire had already reached his own office door. His voice was short and direct. Elena, I need to see you tonight, in person. I drove to the operations center. The building was fully lit, and people rushed through the halls with the tense faces of those fighting a losing battle. It did not feel like an airline headquarters. It felt like the emergency ward of a major hospital. Thomas stood at the entrance of the conference room. The moment he saw me, he said, "Thank you for coming. We do not have much time." Inside, Mark and Samantha were already seated. Mark looked drained, like someone who had been wrung dry but still tried to hold on to whatever authority he had left. Samantha looked different, exhausted in a way that made her seem one small push away from collapsing. I sat down and asked directly, "Do you want the situation or the solution first?" Thomas answered immediately, "The solution." I placed my notebook on the table. I need full access to everything: crew data, maintenance data, federal agency data, the old schedules. I need 6 people from the previous scheduling team. And most importantly, Mark and Samantha are not allowed to touch any technical operation. Mark shot up, offended. "You cannot remove me from this." But Thomas cut him off with a voice I had never heard from him in 8 years. "Sit down, Mark." That told me how bad things had become. I continued, "I need a proper contract. Senior consultant. Full technical authority. I report directly to the chief executive or the board. No intermediaries." Thomas nodded without hesitation. "You will have that." I turned to Samantha. She avoided my eyes. The confidence she had 3 days earlier was gone without a trace. I asked Samantha to walk me through every step you took this morning. Her voice trembled. I entered the data, cleaned it, and ran the model. But something went wrong. I thought the data was... I cut her off. "It is not the data. The issue is the formula, and running the model 3 times, layering every error on top of itself." She lowered her head and apologized. I softened my tone. "No one blames you, but I need every detail so I can fix it." Thomas stood, ending the meeting. "Elena, you have full authority. Tell us what you need." Everyone left the room except Samantha and me. She looked at me, her voice small. "Elena, do you hate me?" I shook my head. "I do not hate people who learn something the hard way. I only hate people who believe they can never be wrong." Samantha almost broke at that. I knew she had not acted out of malice. She had simply walked into a battlefield she did not understand. I opened my laptop and began tearing apart the model. 1 hour to unwind the circular references. Another way to rebuild the structure. I worked through what could still be salvaged. Then, in the third layer of errors, something made me stop. A log entry. It showed clearly who had modified the formula: Mark Hayes. If Samantha's error was an accident, Mark's modification was intentional. Just one altered line, but enough to guarantee the model would explode on the next run, and then pin every failure on her. I understood immediately. Mark had tried to turn Samantha into a shield. He wanted to prove my old system was too complicated. He wanted the federal agency to believe this was a transition crisis, and if I refused to return, he could blame the entire collapse on legacy code. A dirty move, but effective if no one noticed. Samantha walked in with 2 cups of coffee. "Elena, I thought you might need this." I looked at her and asked plainly, "Samantha, did Mark touch your model today?" She froze, then nodded. "Yes. He said he wanted to optimize a few lines. I assumed he had the right." I nodded. I did not tell her she had been set up. She did not need that truth now. Footsteps rushed down the hall. A coordinator stepped in. "Elena, the federal agency wants to connect with you. Tonight. They said the technical lead must explain." I stood, closed my notebook. Samantha looked at me as if I were about to walk into the place she feared most. I told her quietly, "It is all right. I will handle my part. You handle yours. But from now on, do not let anyone touch your model without telling me first." She nodded quickly, and for the first time in 3 days, I saw relief on her face. Someone was finally standing on her side. I stepped into the hallway, heading toward the room where the federal agency was waiting. The air felt thick, like the moments before a major storm hits. People passing by looked at me not with suspicion, but with hope. Strange how that worked. 3 days earlier, they walked me out. Now, they saw me as the last lifeline. But I did not see this as a victory. I saw the truth. This chaos did not need me to create it. They had created it themselves. I was simply the only one left who knew how to dismantle it. When my hand touched the conference room door, I understood one thing clearly. From this moment on, the rules of the game would change. No more lies, no more blaming the old system. No one would get to sacrifice Samantha to save themselves. This time, the truth would speak, and I would be the one to speak it first. I stepped into the conference room a little before 8 in the evening. The cold white light spread evenly across the long table where 5 people were waiting, and at the head of the table, a large screen showed a live call with the federal agency. Static crackled for a moment before the images of 2 inspectors appeared, an older man with silver hair and a middle-aged woman with glasses whose gaze felt sharp enough to cut straight through whoever she looked at. Thomas stood the moment he saw me. He introduced me briefly. This is Elena Carter, who operated North Star's scheduling system for 8 years. The woman from the agency nodded. We have heard of you, Carter, and we have many questions. I sat, calm as if I were facing a problem I had solved 100 times. The federal agency did not intimidate me. The only thing that ever exhausted me was when people who did not understand the system insisted on putting their hands inside it. The male inspector began. We received reports of multiple rest violations and unlawful schedule assignments. We want to know which system produced them. I placed my hands on the table and spoke clearly. Not my old system. This was produced by a new Excel model pushed into operation without validation. Both inspectors leaned forward slightly, suddenly listening harder. The female inspector asked, "Can you explain the new model?" I answered, "An Excel sheet built by Samantha Rodriguez. She recently completed her graduate degree and was assigned to optimize the system." At the end of the table, Samantha shrank when she heard her name. I continued without softening it. Excel cannot handle layered data, federal and state rules, or exception logic. It has no guardrails, no data locks, and no integrity checks. It was never designed to run hundreds of flights safely. That is why schedules are duplicated, rest hours are broken, and assignments are merged without control. The female inspector asked immediately, "Then why was this model pushed into live use?" This time, I looked directly at Mark. He stiffened. This was implemented under Mark Hayes' instruction, despite my warnings before I left North Star. His mouth twitched. "You are twisting this. I opened my laptop and projected the edit logs on the wall. Everything is recorded. Samantha only executed the model. The person who modified the formulas was you." The room fell silent. Samantha stared at me, then at Mark, her face draining as she realized something she had never considered. The male inspector asked, "This is the proof Hayes changed the model." I enlarged the line, "Last edited by M. Hayes, 10:07 in the morning." Then, that change broke the reference loop, forcing the model to triple every layer of data each time it ran. Mark jumped to his feet. "I only removed a duplicate line," Samantha said, but Samantha cut him off with a shout, the first time I had ever heard her raise her voice. "I did not ask you to touch my model. I only asked you to check the federal documents, not write into my formulas." Her words hit the room like a hammer, shattering the story Mark had been trying to build for 3 days. Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "Enough." Mark dropped back into his chair, pale. Thomas nodded at me. "Elena, continue." I took a breath. The federal agency does not care how pretty a system looks. They care that it is correct, and the only correct system we had was the one I built, with its checks, locks, and exception alerts. All of that vanished when the Excel model was deployed. The female inspector nodded. "Can you restore the system within the required time?" I checked the clock. 3.5 hours until the deadline. If North Star gives me full authority, I can do it in 2.5. Thomas did not hesitate. "You have it." The male inspector added, "If you stabilize the system, the agency will acknowledge it. But if you do not," I nodded. "I kept this airline out of crisis for 8 years. I can do it once more." The meeting ended. As the door closed, every pair of eyes in the room shifted to me. Thomas spoke quietly. "Elena, the entire company is depending on you." I stood. "Then let me work." I walked straight to the server room, the place where I had spent 8 years of my life. The warm yellow lights and faint smell of ozone felt like stepping back into a home I knew by heart. I opened the server panel. The old interface greeted me like an old friend, steady and loyal. I started immediately, untangling the reference loops, rebuilding the base tables, reloading the backup from the previous week. Minutes later, the 6 people I requested arrived. None of them asked why I was back or what had happened. They simply stepped into place the way they had for 8 straight years. One of them said, "Just tell us what to do, Elena." I pointed at the screen. "Lock the flight hour tables, clean the duplicated data layers, and under no circumstances open an Excel file while the system is running." They laughed softly, relieved to finally understand the path forward. 2 hours passed without me noticing. When I ran the final simulation, the clean schedule appeared. No errors, fully compliant, fully stable. The team let out small cheers. I only stared at the screen, feeling as if I had pulled North Star back from the edge. I sent the schedule to the federal agency, 10:42 in the evening. The call came back immediately. The female inspector said, "The schedule is valid. North Star will not be suspended." Thomas exhaled as a drowning man dragged back to the surface. The crisis was contained, but the confrontation was not. I stepped into the hallway and saw Mark standing there. No anger left in him, no bluster, only the raw fear of someone who had run out of places to hide. "Elena, we need to talk." I walked past him, my voice level. "There is no we. You have someone you need to talk to, but it is not me." I looked toward the chief executive's office, and I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The real reckoning had only just begun. I walked away from the hallway, leaving Mark standing there like a man watching his future collapse right in front of him. The neon lights washed over his face, exposing every trace of fear he could not hide, no matter how hard he tried. I did not stop. I headed straight to the chief executive's office and knocked once. Thomas opened the door almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for me. He invited me in. Inside were Linda and 2 board members. The air felt as heavy as a formal hearing. Thomas looked at me and said plainly, "Thank you. Without you, we would have lost the entire system tonight." I nodded. I did not need gratitude. I needed the truth put exactly where it belonged. Linda turned her laptop toward me. She said they had reviewed every editing log from the Excel model. All of it matched what I reported to the federal agency. Thomas lowered his voice, heavy as stone. Mark made a serious error. Not just technical. He tried to hide it and push the blame elsewhere. He asked what action I wanted to recommend. I was surprised for a moment, then understood. They needed my voice when speaking to the federal agency. I spoke clearly. "Mark is not fit to manage operational systems. I do not ask for immediate termination, but he must be removed from the operations chain, barred from touching data, and required to admit his error in the internal report. Nothing more and nothing less." The board nodded. Thomas asked why I did not recommend suspension. I answered, "I do not need someone to lose their job for me to feel like I won. I only need to make sure he never gets another chance to put the company at risk." The room was silent for a few seconds. Maybe they expected personal revenge. What I needed was stability. Thomas opened another document. Linda said they wanted to create a new position, Director of Scheduling Systems, reporting directly to the chief executive, with full technical authority and a dedicated team. No more reporting to Mark. No more being treated like back office support. They asked if I would take it. I asked one question. Do I have the authority to reject non-technical directives from management? Thomas answered immediately, "Yes." Only then did I nod. I accepted. I left the meeting about an hour later. The hallway was empty, but no longer felt cold. As I neared the exit, I saw Samantha leaning against the wall, holding a cup of tea. Her eyes looked softer, lighter, though still worn from the day. She said she had been reassigned to the forecasting data group, a role more aligned with her skills and far safer. I nodded. That was where she could learn the right way. She stared at her hands, then said she never thought Mark would drag her into something that deep. I answered quietly, "Your mistake was trusting the wrong person, not trusting yourself." Samantha let out a small laugh, the first time in hours. She thanked me for not taking her down with the system. I told her I do not punish people who make mistakes out of inexperience. I fix the mistakes. She nodded, eyes red but brighter. When I reached the parking lot, Mark was standing beside my car. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the swagger. What remained was the exhaustion and desperation of a man who knew his last card had slipped from his hand. He said quietly, "You won." I answered, "No, I am not playing to win. I am making sure people do not pay the price for your incompetence." Mark was silent for a long moment, then asked if I could tell the chief executive he did not mean to cause harm. I looked him straight in the eyes. "I will tell the truth, only the truth. Whether the truth saves you or not is up to you, not me." Mark lowered his head. He understood he had no choice left. He walked away slowly, his figure shrinking under the yellow lights. It was the ending he earned. Not because he was cruel, but because he was not capable of holding the role he insisted on keeping. I got into my car and started the engine. The clock was nearing midnight. The city was silent except for the wind slipping through the window cracks. I looked back at the operations building, the same one that sent me out like expired equipment 3 days earlier. Today, I left it in a completely different way, not out of revenge, not to prove anything, but to assert what should have been recognized long ago. An airline does not run on illusions or pretty spreadsheets. It stands because people who understand the system know what keeps it alive. And finally, they saw that. I rolled up the window and drove into the open night. A new chapter for North Star, and for me, began. This time, it would be written by people who actually knew the work, not by colorful grids on a screen. And most of all, this time, no one would ever take that authority away from me again.